What a win for Arsenal. One undoubtedly so vital, but what was impressive for me today was the way this Arteta team slowly bent proceedings into their own favour today. There was a calm resolve to this Arsenal team that, minute by minute, you felt that Spurs were just finding themselves increasingly in a position that Arteta and his Arsenal men were totally fine with them being in. Now, in the tactical preview to this game, we covered how it was really important for Arsenal not to succumb to a narrative of being underprepared for today. This wasn't an occasion for just getting by or managing unavailabilities, but it was about rejigging dynamics and genuinely adapting. This video is going to be my quick fire thoughts and tactical analysis immediately post game, and I'll have a fully fleshed out, full blown analysis coming out in more detail on the game tomorrow. But let's start with the approach that Mikel Arteta was forced into taking, setting up in that 4-2-4 foundation as I called for in the preview. It was the exact personnel we expected him to go for as well. The calm head of Jurrien in the middle and the tried and trusted dynamics around Leandro Trossard. But the key structural changes had been made. Arteta implemented that fixed double pivot of Jurrien and Thomas Partey, and then created that fluid front four with that dual shadow striker pairing of Kai Havertz and Leandro Trossard, and gave Jurrien Timber that more unconstrained role from left back we had been calling out for, moving from those wider areas into those higher left-hand sided pockets on top of our pivot in settled possession when we tried to attack with five. We've spoken about how Jurrien Timber and Riccardo Calafiori would differ in this specific type of left-back role when we do play with a fixed double pivot, and how Tomiyasu's application of this role last season, which involved bursts into space and later arrivals, feels more Calafiori-esque, and Kivior's role, which although he wasn't best suited for, but that more fixed occupation in these higher left pockets is something Timber can excel at. And Timber, I think, knitted our left-hand side today together so well. He often anchored a lot of our touches, waited for Havertz to drift deeper to link play, or Jurrien to get onto the ball, and then Timber would burst high, even offering himself as an outball a couple of times. But there was a real emphasis, I think, of getting Timber surrounded by others in his close proximity, create those smooth and snappy interchanges in the build-up on that left-hand side, that really connected play, and then higher up in those higher pockets we were talking about, Trossard and Martinelli moved off Timber really naturally, and Timber often picks locks through a couple of Spurs lines to find them in behind. There was a better balance too overall to our left-hand sided play today. Players moved off each other quite organically, as we've been saying. There was always someone probing in behind in those out-to-in channels Spurs are vulnerable in. Trossard could hinge deeper and connect play between the lines, as could Kai Havertz, and Kai Havertz could also facilitate play and pin that Spurs back line. Timber could get tight and associative with people, or slip and slide himself off others into blind spots. The left-hand side today was clever in its movements, and Timber was often at the heart of these, often a real technical point of reference for us in the final third, which we really needed today, not just a foil for others in his movements. If we are talking about a better balance to our dynamics maybe today, then Trossard and Havertz in that dual shadow striker pairing, if you will, exemplifies this. One of the reasons I like the dynamics of our 4-2-4 so much for this Arsenal team specifically is because we have such a plethora of different options and counter movements, if that makes sense, in the front line. We're fluid and dynamic. Like again today, we saw Havertz pinning and being that outball for us, commanding that big area of space, with Trossard then gobbling up those loose balls in those smaller spaces, floating just off of Havertz. There was definitely an intent with our 4-2-4 to catch the Spurs centre-backs high, create these close quarter, fast tempo combinations with our players out wider, and then release our runners into the channels in behind, especially without a central organiser to our play higher up in the middle third and the final third in someone like a Martin Odegaard. You start though to this front four to add Raheem Sterling, who made his debut, to add Gabriel Jesus to that dynamic, and you have one of real interchangeability and ability to be quite free-form at times. And behind that, as I've said, you've got that fixed double pivot and a back four for that stability and balance. But I want to talk more about Kai Havertz right now. In the preview, we mentioned his ability, and one that was typified in his performance against Brighton, to float across the opposition backline and be an outball wherever he sees fit. And today was no different. He dictated the trajectory of Raya's launches from the back, and Spurs are really aggressive, we know, in their man-to-man press, and they leave 1v1s in their backline. So when Havertz pulled onto Van de Ven or Ndoggy, trying to create those flick-on situations for Saka or second ball knockdowns for us to win, these became really effective. And without Havertz as that pressure valve, that pressure release up top, of course it's a completely different game today. Again, he was in that floaty role, and the thing that was most interesting about his performance with me was the facilitation he had in some of our slick play on both the left and right hand sides. Again, I'll have a full analysis out tomorrow, and I'll create graphics to really flesh these ideas out. But I love when our build-up would get tight and intricate, often one touch down the left and right hand sides, and Havertz would just drift into the tip of these sort of wide diamonds or box shapes, collapsing the space, and then just quickening the speed of our play nicely with first-time passes, vacating the space for Martinelli or for Saka or for Timber or for Trossard to move into. He was really clever in these positions, especially when he got onto the ball. I think his intelligence of when sometimes to hold onto it and not to release too quickly, that was evident. Arrive into space, pivot the attack, get us up the pitch, provide that pivoting force for the whole attack to move off, for the build-up, for the corner that led to Gabriel's goal. This was at the absolute forefront. Havertz holds onto the ball and waits for Saka to make that move from out to in. And with these transitions for us being such a big part of the game today, Kai really was the linchpin to everything we did moving forward, and there was a real efficiency to his on-ball stuff too. Let's talk about Arsenal out of possession now, because of course that was a massive reason why we won the game, and also how we limited Spurs on the ball. The discipline, the compactness and the quality that we shows at the back are well renowned, and it starts from the front. We've spoke about Postecoglou's overly steadfast belief in using his 2-3-5 shape throughout all the thirds of the pitch. And this really played into our hands when we're trying to keep things and keep the centre compact, not giving Jorginho and Partey too much space to cover. From goal kicks, we pressed in a similar vein to normal, Jorginho understandably adopting a more reticent approach of Rice's role from left centre mid in our press, behind Trossard and Havertz, who had Odegaard's role of pressing through from midfield today. But in settled play for Spurs, Arsenal settled straight into their mid-block, and Spurs, like I said, played into their hands here. Bentancur was in the 6 without Yves Bissouma, and between Trossard and Havertz, the lanes to him were so easily cut off, even as Trossard and Havertz pressed the ball for Romero and Van de Ven in the centre-backs. And this is because of Spurs' commitment to the 2-3-5. Porro and Ndoggy were straight away inverted and too narrow, meaning passing lanes could be marshalled as well as their positioning. Arsenal's wingers could just stack on the Spurs inverted fullbacks. Inside our block, Partey and Jorginho would man-mark James Maddison and Kulusevski respectively, and if Maddison ever, for example, moved deep and outside our block, Partey would just let him go and Arsenal would stay compact. For Spurs' wingers in Johnson and Son, they're runners who need to be released, but because of this lack of central access for Spurs, the circulation balls out wide for them were Johnson and Son. Like we said, Maddison would come deep on that left-hand side, meaning Ndoggy would trigger that rotation by moving higher into the half space. Partey here could keep track of Ndoggy quite well, and let's be honest, Ndoggy isn't that small spaces type of player, and this is one of the downsides, I think, of Spurs' in-possession stuff. There can be sometimes a flurry or too many movements, too many wasted actions. Sometimes there does have to be slightly more rigidity, as Arsenal sort of went towards today. The best joy that Tottenham Hotspur had the whole game was stretching our block in behind. In the second half, they tried to double down and do this with Kulusevski stretching from the half space in the number 8, and I think really try and take advantage of our lack of legs in these areas. And for a moment, it looked like they were getting some joy here. But as was the way we compressed the space and communicated as a unit, it wasn't enough for Spurs to truly fashion anything. Like I said, qualitatively, we may not have had the legs to marshal these half spaces and the fluid Spurs rotations here as much as we normally would, but we made up for it in every other margin, especially defending the box. I think as well, if we're being critical of the profiles that Postecoglou put out there today and in the Spurs squad, inside of a block that's as compact as Arsenal's, they lack that dribbling and manipulation, that tight space play that, ironically, Jurrien Timber gave Arsenal today higher up. And I think what we were really good at is not just sitting off all the time. Saliba and Gabriel in particular were really aggressive in the right moments to counterpunch and step back up the pitch when the ball was fired through the centre. Again, making those spaces on the pitch as small as possible. And this is not just from the back, but this is in attack too. Combine short and efficiently, move as a unit, get those counter movements in pods working. That was the game plan for Arsenal, it felt today. But let's talk about this Arsenal team in general now too. I think Timber mentioned in his post-match comments the unity, and I think that's exemplified by the trust that the players have across the pitch. Timber defensively, for example, he bides his time so well in the duel. If there is space to run at him and run beyond for the winger he's up against, he channels them wide really effectively and he waits for support from his winger or centre-back. And then in these closer spaces, when he does get support, he can rely on his burst or how he snaps into the tackle. Again, any spaces that may have seemed to be opened up for Spurs were gradually closed down and suffocated, compressed, and that sense of immovability mentioned by myself in the beginning started to be created, but one that is not just about stubborn defending, as we've mentioned, but slowly bending the game to your will offensively too. We all know the nasty underbelly this Arsenal team has, that sort of quiet nastiness that is only ever let out when it really needs to be. And I think this is the best blend. Arsenal's aggression never seems like overcompensation for a confidence that isn't there. Instead, it comes across as this subtle arrogance and bullishness with total confidence and investment in the game plan. To finish, I just want to mention a couple of other details, including Ethan Nwaneri's cameo. I think it showed what, if we're nitpicking, we were lacking in our starting 11. Someone between the lines who could start to run things a bit more, maybe in the final third, more centrally, who could receive, turn, release and accelerate play all in one action to really make the most of the transitional situations and spaces that we created higher up. The thing that makes Nwaneri the thing that marks him out is his range of motion, though. How his body moves can turn so fluidly, but also how he has that motor that can sustain attacks, that can help us in transition. I think Trossard and Jesus have shown us how a specific type of presence alongside Havertz as this dual 9 or dual shadow striker partnership works really well, and Nwaneri definitely has a range of uses, but this is certainly one of them that with the right balance around him can work really well. We saw how he interacted with Kai Havertz in his little cameo, for example. As I've said, there's a pathway for minutes, a big one this season. He is ready for them, and I think an appearance in the North London derby, even though we were short on numbers, I think gives Arteta the perfect sort of icebreaker to now use Nwaneri more. This was obviously a massively important win to take to the Etihad too. And I think with Rice back, again, that 4-2-4 template, that blueprint is there for the Etihad as well. If we can come away with a result there, away at Manchester City, with 11 or 13 points won out of our first 15 available, with the context of how we dropped points in the Brighton game too, it's a first 5 games we can be happy with. I'm a very, very proud Arsenal fan tonight. As always, get talking in the comments down below. I'll be talking with you. I'm going to watch the game back now and come back with a fully fledged out analysis very, very shortly. But thanks so much for watching. I'm a very happy Arsenal fan, as I'm sure you all are tonight too. I'll catch you in the next one. See you later.